So here's a question for 9 o'clock on a Monday morning.
Okay.
If you had a 1 minute slot or a 2 minute slot on a broadcast that went out to the entire world at peak time, what
Yeah.
would you say?
Well, I probably prepare quite a lot
Yeah. more than
rather than
more than
have
two
no
seconds.
preparation. But what would I say? Well, the thing that comes to mind is the Gregory Bateson quote, which says that basically the major problems of the world are a result of a gap between the way nature works and how humans think the world works. And actually, basically, we need to learn to think and act like nature. And when we do that, everything gets much, much, much easier. So it's a kind of, in a sense, what's really needed is a bit of a paradigm shift, which is instead of using this kind of mechanistic Cartesian model of a world where, I don't know when it was, 15th, 16th century, when René Descartes said, oh no, man's separate from nature.
17th.
17th, man's separate from nature. Your brain is separate from your body.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it was all about sort of separation and seeing
Yeah.
the world as a kind of a mechanical device. And you got Newtonian physics and all that, and it works incredibly well. You can put a man on the moon. So there's lots of plus points to it, but the downside has been this kind of growing cultural sense that we're separate from nature, and that it's all somehow it's a bit of a machine. Well, it isn't. It's a living thing, and basically, if we treat it like a living thing, then it works better, and we work better. Farming when farming is done in a way which works with nature, is more productive. I mean, that's just basically. I can send you references. If you look at if you grow a crop, a field just of one plant, it doesn't work as well as as a field of many crops.
Mm.
Polycultures are more diverse, more stable. Well, they're obviously more diverse, but they're more stable, and they're overall higher yielding than single crops. There isn't anywhere in nature with single crops.
Mm-hmm.
No prairie has one grass. So if we say, okay, well, how does nature work and how do we apply those principles to the way human systems work? They work better too.
What was the name again? Bateson.
Gregory Bateson, yeah, he was a kind of anthropologist. His partner was Margaret Mead, who said, never doubt that a small group of its citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Okay. And so you went straight into plants and growing systems, and I think a lot of people think that that's what permaculture is.
Well, okay, so yes, it's how you design those systems. The permaculture bit, in a way, is the application of systems thinking to real world problems. So our systems thinking is inspired greatly from nature. Nature is the great system. This is a natural system. I am nature. It works brilliantly. Billions of cells, bacteria, stuff which is me, stuff which isn't really me, all working together, all these systems and processes, autonomic, blah, 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 central nervous, it's all systems.
You're quite perky for a Monday morning after a hard weekend's work.
So it's all about relationships and how the output of one system becomes the input of another.
And do you mean just for growing systems, or?
No, I mean for anything and everything. So it's the great thing about principles as opposed to techniques is, I mean, techniques are brilliant. So it's like, say, a gardening technique like mulching. It's fantastic. It's really, really good for stopping the weeds. It really stops the evaporation coming off. It's a brilliant technique, and it has a really great place. But I can't say, I want to make a sustainable city. I'll mulch it. You can't just mulch a city and expect that to create the result you want. Techniques have got a limit. Whereas principles, they don't really tell you what to do. They help you think about the way you can do things. So principle of each, say, the cycling system, so cycling nutrients and resources, the outputs of one system becoming the inputs of another. That cycling principle, I can apply that principle at home when I'm making compost that goes into the veggie patch, which creates the vegetables, which comes into the kitchen, which I chop and make into compost. That cycle is an application of that principle, but I could use that that same principle to create a kind of industrial ecology in West Yorkshire, where the output of some factories could be the input of another factory. The hot water, waste hot water from one factory becomes the input into a swimming pool. So it's, the principle can be applied at any scale and in any context. And you've got a range of principles and you don't have to apply all of them in every situation. But this is the thing about learning to think and act like nature, is it's really, permaculture is a different way of looking at the world. I hesitate to say we're not trying to change the way people think, because that's very rude, in my opinion.
Changing the way people think is rude.
Yeah, I wouldn't claim to try to. I'm not trying to change the way people think, because I think I've got no. How do I know how they think already? People have got marvelous ways of thinking: imagination, beauty, darkness. That's their stuff. But what we can do is we can offer another thing to add to what they do. So I just want to be very clear that it's not about changing the way people think. It's more about giving people more tools to use, more approaches as part of who they are. And if that means they let go of other things, that's up to them. And if they don't, then they do. So permaculture really is a kind of series of thinking tools in many ways. But it's more than that. It's a kind of, for me, I always go back to, well, let's make a permaculture cake to make it easy. So, do you want to make a permaculture cake? So 3 ingredients. First one is an ethical framework. So ours is very simple, keep it simple. Earth care, people care, fair shares. Make sure that people have got, so basically, are we looking after the Earth's living systems and helping ensure that all species have got the opportunity to flourish? Not just species, but ecosystems, which are something in their own right too. That sort of assembly of species. And the natural world. And then the people care is about making sure people have got that which they need to meet their own needs. So it's not about meeting everyone's needs as such, it's about making sure everyone's got what they need to meet their own needs. So it's about really supporting self-reliance, self-determination, land. One of the most important campaigns in the UK at the moment is around land justice, because we live in a country which has got very, very unequal land. As far as I can see, we're always going to have poverty in this country until we actually change the land equation, because it's a fundamental resource.
Yeah.
So people care is about ensuring people have the resources that they need in order to meet their own needs. And that could include information or as well as physical things. And then the fair shares bit is a bit like kind of, justice on top of the Old Bailey, sort of justice with the sword and the balance. Only the permaculture version has got 2 balances. One balance is between people and people. So what's the fair share between the rich and the poor, between rich countries and poor countries, between how do we get social justice, how do we get a fairer share of resources in society, and the other balance is about how do we make sure there's a fair share between humans and all the other species. I mean, at the moment, human beings are dominating the biosphere. We're basically saying, no, we're going to have as much of a biosphere as we want, and whatever's left over, if there is anything left over, that can be for nature. And actually, the permaculture approach is to say, well, no, how can we meet our needs on the smallest possible amount of land, so that as much as possible can go back to being truly wild.
Yeah, we're not just
very well.
We're not just dominating the biosphere. We're sort of slowly winding it down.
Well, indeed, yeah, that's right. It's like a closing down sale.
Yeah,
Like a closing down sale. Everything must go.
Yeah,
kind of lunatic closing down sale. That's what it is.
Closing down sale.
Yeah,
so what do you do now? You personally, what are you up to?
What am I up to? Well, I guess fundamentally, I try to infuse and make connections. That's kind of probably my role. I mean, there's a technical role of being someone who reports to the board of trustees, make sure they've got the information that they need to know whether we're on track. There's the work to do to ensure the organisation is working well. So working with all the other members of staff and ensuring that we've got our systems in place and our processes and everyone's happy and we're doing the jobs we said we'd do. So that's the kind of typical chief executive stuff, or coordinator stuff, or however you describe that role, that kind of person that takes the overview.
I mean, what sort of priorities are you looking at? What areas and what are your priorities?
I guess so a few things. So one of the things that we're trying to do is work out, how does the Permaculture Association respond to a world in crisis? I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that basically climate change is pretty much, it's not beyond the laws of physics now, but it increasingly seems like it's beyond the laws of sociology to kind of actually avert catastrophic climate change. If you look at MacArthur Institute's very clear, concise graphics around how much time we've got left for the different scenarios, we've gone past the medium estimate scenario for 1.5 degrees about a month, 5-6 weeks ago. We've got a year and a half before we've got past the upper range. So that's basically based on the previous IPCC report. That's how much time we've got left. That's how much carbon we've got left. That's our carbon budget. And even the whole notion of a carbon budget is frankly rubbish. There is no carbon budget. Because suggesting there is a carbon budget suggests that there's still some more that we could use. Whereas in reality, every single drop of oil that we use now is over.
We're already past the. We're already
way past it. We started off at 280. We're at 420 or something.
You may have looked into this more than me. There's a debate about whether climate change or global warming is growing exponentially. Do you think it is?
The thing is, we don't know. It's possible.
Yeah.
And so in terms of what are we doing, we're taking a little step back to think about how do we redouble our efforts to ensure that this kind of systems thinking and our approach to creating sustainable, not necessarily regenerative, resilient systems can be more widely adopted and quite fast. So we're looking at a lot about our communications, we're looking a lot about how we can accelerate learning, and we're looking at about how we can really build our networks. So I think they're probably the big things, is about communicating more effectively, accelerating learning about permaculture and related subjects and approaches, and then basically building networks so that those networks can start to work more effectively together. So whether that's in permaculture, things like Permaculture Collab and the European Permaculture Network, or whether that's outside of permaculture, which is things like Ecolease, which is the European network, and Control Shift and others, which is kind of more UK.
Tell me what those things are. What were those things that you mentioned?
So Collab.
Collab.
CO and then LAB.
Okay.
Collab is the Permaculture Collaborative Laboratory.
Okay.
Because permaculture doesn't have a we're kind of anarchic in the sense of being self-organizing. There's no formal international structure. It's not permaculture TM. There's no one controlling permaculture. It's spread rapidly because it's been done by this informal grassroots education approach.
So you can do something that you think is permaculture, and you can call it permaculture, and you can put a permaculture label on it. Is that? You basically can. Yeah, that's right. There's no regulator. I mean, the only regulation is basically, I guess, how good you are and whether people come back. That's true. In different countries, it varies. So in the UK, for example, in terms of doing a permaculture course, we have a certified teachers register. And that certification is one which the teachers themselves or ourselves came up with. So it wasn't imposed by the Permaculture Association. We just said, hey, everyone, do we want to have an agreed standard of kind of quality that ensures that people who get our certificate know that they're going to get something that's good? And people said yes, and we agreed what that was. We're not stopping anyone else doing a permaculture course, leading a permaculture course. If someone was really to abuse it, we might say X. We don't think you should do courses by X because actually we've had terrible reports.
but we're not the police. We don't intend to be so. So it's about self-regulating and basically creating. We're just setting out what we think is good quality, and people can do other stuff, but we can only really vouch for the stuff that we know about.
I think permaculture is a fantastic thing. Really, the more you look into it, the more you see the connections that you were talking about. It's really a fantastic system, fantastic idea.
But it's sort of unfair in a way.
It's what?
It's sort of a bit unfair in a way.
It's unfair?
Yeah, because on one level, we're kind of, with the ethics, we're taking the moral high ground, and then we're using the whole force of nature. So, we've got nature on our side, which seems like a pretty unfair competitive advantage.
How did you get into it?
Well, I guess in some ways I could say I defined first my teenage years as being no. So I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in the status quo. I'm not interested in the corporate agenda. I'm not interested in working for NatWest Bank. And, it was initially a kind of quiet no, reading about acid rain and stuff Friends of the Earth put out, stuff about nuclear warfare. But it became an increasingly strong no, and eventually I thought, I know, I'll make myself unemployable. So I did a fine art degree. And fantastic. I mean, I love sculpture and, really inspired by people like Joseph Beuys and the whole kind of social sculpture, quite radical approaches that art can take. Many revolutions have been started by artists.
It's funny you should say that. I'll come back to this because this mutual credit idea that I've been talking to you about, I'll come back to that a bit later.
Okay.
And there's a very, very successful one in Sardinia, and it was started by arts graduates.
Great.
They didn't have any technical ability there to bring people in to actually build the thing.
One of the things about art which is good, it's a bit like, you see, art, maths, permaculture, science, their approaches, their ways of looking at the world. Art isn't a subject, it's an approach. And what it gives you is a creative way of thinking about the world. So I did that, and then basically when I finished, I was very lucky because it was 1992 and it was a period of very high graduate unemployment. So there was really very little prospect of me getting a job. And so I just thought, well, I'd use first, because I thought, well, I'm not really going to be a fine artist, I don't think. So what am I going to do? So I was sort of now starting to look for the yes. And basically, to cut a long story short, I went down with a friend, hitched down to London to see the director's cut of Blade Runner. And I came out afterwards to phone up Julie, my girlfriend and my partner now. And I was just waiting outside the phone box, and this guy was in there. I'm sure I recognise that guy. And he turned around and said, I know you. Come on, let's go and have a cup of coffee. And he was a bit tired, and I said, you look knackered. Where have you been? He said, oh, I've just come back from Denmark. I've been to an international permaculture convergence. Said, what's permaculture? What's
I can't imagine you saying permaculture.
When he started telling me, it was literally like it's like that moment at Christmas when, as a kid, you've got this kind of present and you're unwrapping it, and even though you haven't actually seen the inside, you're getting this growing feeling like it's exactly what you want. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, oh, this is exciting. And I've been excited ever since. And that was 92, so that's, God, 25, 26 years ago now.
It is a brilliant thing. What successes have you had?
Well, my greatest success is still being here. And I don't say that lightly, because many fantastic organisations and networks and groups in Britain and around the world really rely on so much goodwill and volunteer labour that, it's like the army is well funded, but the people doing kind of stuff about people care and earth care often aren't. And when I first sort of encountered the Permaculture Association, it was, I guess it had a variety of different kind of internal problems. And then when I became trustee in 96, and then in 99 I took on the office, I was asked to look after it for a year. And although I was familiar with the group that did it before, it wasn't until I actually got all the files in Leeds and went through them that I realised there were probably about 6 6 admin systems. There'd been 6 goes at the office. And I realized that basically it'd been run on a kind of 3-year burnout cycle, which I don't mean that rudely. It's not that anyone did it wrong, but basically it was just like this 3-year burnout cycle. So I thought, well, either I give it up now, avoid getting burnt out, and just basically say, no, actually I've just changed my mind, or I'll give it a bit of persistence and give it long enough to settle down. So basically I looked up, what does burnout look like? How do you recognize the symptoms? And made a decision and a kind of agreement with myself not to burn out. And that, basically look after myself as much as possible. And take a longer term view. And so I think my main claim to fame is still being here. Kind of, I've outlasted Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, and I don't know how long Mao had, but.
No, I feel the same way. So it's not so much burnout because I really enjoy what I do. My job involves talking to people like you and writing interesting stuff and debating stuff and trying to work out what we're going to do. But then suddenly, I'll stop and think about where humanity is headed and the effect that we're having, and it just seems hopeless sometimes. And I just it can feel quite depressing sometimes.
Yeah.
But then you have to sort of just shake yourself down and get back into it.
There's that, and there's just for sheer. I mean, for Permaculture Association, there's lots of people have high expectations. I mean, we just did a survey of our members as part of this sort of strategic review, and quite literally, our members want us to change the education system, change agriculture, transform society, and create a sustainable world. And that's quite a big job.
It's quite a big job.
So people that are interested in permaculture have got really high ambitions for the way the world could be. And that can put a lot of pressure on ourselves. So there's that. I mean, other achievements are things like, we did the International Permaculture Convergence in 2015 in London. We had over 1,000 people from 70 countries. We've got a really successful diploma program with over 400 apprentices. We've got demonstration centres, about 120 demonstration centres in England and Scotland. We know what the word for permaculture is in Welsh.
Okay.
What is it? It's Paramaethu. And the Paramaethu Cymru, which is our kind of strategic network in Wales, took us about three goes round working with Welsh language people to get to the point of kind of really getting the right word. And Paramaethu means, broadly, I'm not the expert, but it's along the lines of kind of perpetually nurturing. So the nurturing is like the perma comes from permanent, and the para is like a perpetual, which is like permanent. Mm-hmm. And then the maithu, I think, is like nurturing, but in like a husbandry sort of sense. So our title is Perpetually Nurturing Wales, which is lovely.
That sounds very nice.
That really is what it's all about. How do we really set out to care for ourselves and our land over the long term?
Here's a curveball for you. I live in London with my wife, and we're looking to get out. We want to live in a smaller town somewhere and possibly live in some sort of a co-housing project. What is a permaculture world possible with cities of more than 10 million people?
10 million, I think, is really getting tricky. I wouldn't say it's. We don't know yet, do we? Because we haven't tried. It's. I guess for me, the kind of the model of cities which Ebenezer Howard put forward in the kind of Garden Cities book is a vision which I think is very powerful. The idea of really transforming the kind of peri-urban landscape to being highly productive. And where basically you've got the outputs of a city becoming the inputs. So, in the Farmers of 40 Centuries book in China, or that F.H. King wrote in based on his observations of Chinese peasant agriculture.
F.H. King?
F.H. King.
And the title was?
Farmers of 40 Centuries.
Farmers of 40 Centuries, okay.
And that I guess centuries ago, the smallest coin you could in China, as I understand it, smallest coin was basically worth a bucket of shit. And shit had value.
Yeah. Night soil.
Basically, that when the night watchman would take their carts out into the countryside and they'd basically process it and turn it into compost, which meant they could manage those fields for 4,000 years.
Yeah.
And if you get the nutrient flow right between cities and their kind of rural hinterland, if we were to really think about how each city was to invest in its rural space in a really, really intelligent way, then I think huge change is possible. I mean, from the perspective of human well-being, having a kind of much more deliberate, conscious ability and that connection with the countryside, more people being out in nature is fantastic. Got proven therapeutic benefits. The fact that we can grow a huge amount of our food from land very close to the city and actually in the city. I mean, we've got the idea of city farms. In a sense, what we need to do is think of the city as a farm. And that's the kind of permaculture approach, is to create edible landscapes, settlements which are themselves productive. So every south-facing wall becomes a peach tree, or a grapevine, or a goji berry vine. Why not? We can massively intensify the way we use our urban and space, and then connect our urban space with the peri-urban environment.
I completely agree with you. When we moved into this house, the front garden was completely concreted. We dug it all up, and now there's an apple tree, there's blackcurrant bushes, strawberries. But we're swimming against the tide. Every other house is concrete enough to drive to park their cars on.
I think the thing is that clearly what we've got at the moment doesn't work, and we need quite a profound change. And that's coming anyway. It's called climate change, and it's going to knock on our door any time now. And it's going to have massively disruptive effects all around the world. If we are to respond, then we're going to have to rethink how we live on this planet. And that might sound like a big deal, but actually that's what we've always done. Julie and myself have been thinking recently about our perceptions of the Second World War. So when we were kids growing up, we were like, God, that was so long ago. That was a whole other era. I was born in 1970. It's only 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
The change from 1945 to 1970 was absolutely profound. Mm. The change between 1945 and 1920 was profound. Mm. We've been going through the last... My great-granddad was born in the middle of Thassos, a Greek island. They're called Theologos. And it could have been the 17th century. His son worked for Lockheed Martin and helped put rockets on the moon. Mm-hmm. It's like the capacity for human beings to change is extraordinary. And I think that the thing that the kind of thinkers, the people with a bit of foresight, people that are looking at the kind of bigger picture, what we need to do is say, look, the push is coming really quickly, quicker than we realize. The challenge now is to set out our pathways that help people to make that practical transition as quickly as possible.
But the world's growing zones, I think the southern hemisphere is going to be in trouble quite quickly. And the growing zone is going to move north, isn't it? So the Sahara Desert is advancing by kilometers a year in some parts of West Africa, and it's not going to be long before the Mediterranean is looking quite deserty, I think, and Britain is quite Mediterranean, growing grapes and figs, and we are already.
Yeah, I mean, on the whole, the answer is more trees, unless you're in somewhere which is a kind of brittle landscape, in which case it's bizarrely possibly more grazing animals.
That's controversial.
Well, not really. I mean, it's just a systems perspective. So basically, you look at, say, somewhere like Jordan. Jordan considers itself to have 97% desert. And I went to Jordan for the International Convergence in 2011. And I was in the museum in Amman, and there's the Madaba, a famous mosaic called the Madaba mosaic, which was they just had a drawing out of it. And they had a sort of fragmented mosaic, and it said, lions were numerous in the area. Now, to have lions, numerous lions,
big animals, yeah.
Lots of animals. To have lots of animals, you need lots and lots and lots of grass.
Yeah.
So this is what I thought, because it was the land of milk and honey in the Bible. So whenever I was talking to Jordanians, saying, "Oh, yeah, but it's all desert," I'd say, "No, sorry, it's not desert. What are you talking about? It's desertified savanna." And only until you reclassify in your head that it's desertified savanna will you come up with a proper solution, in my opinion. Because desert sounds like that's its final destination. Desertified savanna feels like something that could be restored.
With increasing temperatures, though, with increasing global temperatures, could it be restored?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Let's start now.
I want to hang on to that optimism.
I'm not for a minute suggesting that the world will remain as it was. There will clearly be parts of it which aren't going to be the same. However, this is why we need to have when land is brittle, which is a kind of technical phrase, which is about how much water it gets and when it gets the water, then basically you need animals to process nutrients. In a non-brittle environment like Wales, microorganisms in the soil have always got moisture, so they can always break stuff down. We don't need animals in our system as such. But in a dry area, basically what nature's done is put all those microorganisms in a safe, protective space. It's called the guts of animals.
Inside animals.
So it's not, I'm not for a minute suggesting we need more animals to eat more animals. We might need more animals so that we can, basically, it's like the earth likes to have its skin well protected. Like we like to have moisturizer on our skin. The earth likes to have vegetation. And when you strip that vegetation away, it's like a wound. And one of the most important things we need to be doing as human beings is trying to make sure there's a healthy skin to the earth, and that's basically plants.
Mm-hmm. So the other day I realised something quite interesting, that the UK's population is rising. It's 66 million now. It was 60 million when I was not so long ago. And I noticed that Germany's population is going to fall from 84 million to 70 million by the end of the century. And Britain's population is going to rise from 66 million to 80 million by the end of the century.
Yeah.
And so I was looking at the trends in various countries, and the population of Japan and Italy and places like that is going to fall quite significantly.
Yeah.
So then I thought I just looked at a random African country, Yemen, and the population now is 11 million. And the projected population by the end of this century is 80 million, 80. In Somalia.
Oh, in Somalia, yeah.
And so I started to look at other African countries, and it was the same picture.
That's the growth area for sure.
The projected population by the end of this century is 4 billion for Africa, from 1.2 billion now. Does the Permaculture Association have anything to say about population? I know.
Yeah, it does for sure.
Yeah.
So basically, this is the third ethic. So the Earth Care, People Care, Fair Shares. Part of that fair shares bit is living within the Earth's carrying capacity. And that means that we basically create limits for ourselves. So to live within the Earth's carrying capacity, we have to basically limit our consumption and ensure that our consumption and our population to the Earth's carrying capacity. Now, that's a movable feast. We don't know what the balance between consumption and population.
Yeah, it depends on how much you consume, doesn't it?
It's complex.
Yeah.
So, often it's quoted like, a Bangladeshi has the ecological footprint 60 times lower than one American. So, for every American, the same consumption is 60 Bangladeshi people. Now,
yeah,
I'm not saying statistics are right, but it gives you an impression of the interplay between population and consumption.
Yeah. And have you seen what's happened to the Bangladeshi population in the last
10, 20 years? It's
no, it's probably gone up, but I think Bangladesh.
No. I mean, what's happened in Bangladesh is incredible. The growth in population has just fallen off the edge of a cliff.
Yeah,
they've really almost stabilized their population.
Now, Hans Rosling, who died recently, his view was that Bangladesh.
Did he die? I didn't know that.
Yeah, their approach to family planning was about peer-to-peer, so it's about engaging women to talk to other women about the issues. So the most successful kind of so-called developing world family planning program, that certainly one of the most successful. It's a very good model for other places. So essentially what permaculture is saying is human beings somehow need to get back to one planet living. At the moment we're at sort of three planet living, only we haven't got 3 planets. So we've got to reduce our consumption overall by a very significant amount. Now, I think
the whole of humanity. Oh, when you say we, you mean the UK? The UK is 3 planet living. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. It's different in different places.
Yeah.
Now, there's a number of ways to go about that, because if you want to talk about population, that's always about other people. We talk about consumption. Well, actually, but the richest 10% of the world are causing 50% of climate change.
Yeah. This is when people say, "Oh, the UK has reduced it's broken the connection between economic growth and carbon emissions and pollution and things like that."
Which
it's exported it to Southeast Asia and China, and
so
it's still there. Those factories are still there, and they're producing all this stuff for us.
So basically, the permaculture position, as I understand it, is that human beings need to work out how to have a lower impact on the planet and a higher positive impact. In order to do that, that means we need to do both. We need to reduce our consumption levels, and we need to support people to basically help people have smaller families. Now, that's not about sterilization or eugenics or anything like that. The most effective ways of supporting people to have smaller families is to provide family planning, good maternal health care, good child's health care. Basically, if you look after people and they don't feel under so much threat, they have less children.
And education for women is a big one as well.
Education
so they feel like they have other options in life.
So none of it is coercive. None of it is telling people what they should or shouldn't do. It's people making their own decisions. I don't mind saying publicly, I've had a vasectomy. I've had 2 kids. I'm not having any more. It's about taking personal responsibility and basically creating the sort of support structures which make it easy for people to take responsibility. So, yeah, population is an issue, and we do want to try and find ways to have smaller families, because, I mean, one of my colleagues says, yeah, but Andy, it's not about population, because if human beings were a positive force on the planet, then more would be even better. And I agree, that would be fantastic, but we haven't reached that point yet.
No.
We haven't got to the point where human beings, there aren't many net positive human beings. There's probably most indigenous people are. But
you still consume. You can't live without consuming. So there is got to be a limit to the population.
Yes, I mean, clearly there does have to be, there is a limit. I mean, you could, it's like, takes me back to that New Economics Foundation about infinite growth, where they had the gerbil or the hamster or something.
The hamster, yeah.
Planet. There comes a point, yes, of course, where everything has a limit. We don't know exactly where that is. At the moment, we know we're overshooting the Earth's carrying capacity, and so somehow we have to reduce our overall impact significantly. That's a combination of family planning, population, self-control, and the simplest and easiest and fastest thing we can do is change our own consumption behaviours.
Yeah.
This is where, although I'm a great believer in grassroots action, I also think we need government action which basically does set limits. Why if plastic lasts forever, how come nothing I seem to buy lasts more than 5 years? If the legal speed limit is 70 miles an hour, how come I can go and buy a car that can do 140 miles per hour?
Yeah.
Right? And the 70 miles per hour I don't need, and therefore 70 miles per hour of basically input into the engine, the embodied energy of that car, which is completely unnecessary. So we actually have to start, and basically we should be on an emergency footing. I think there are people that are going to be calling for climate change to be considered as an emergency. Mm. And I agree, it really is an emergency. We actually are in desperate times, and we don't know if in a couple of decades from now, or even a decade from now, what the situation could be. If it goes to 4 degrees quickly with all the feedback loops,
we're headed for Venus.
Population might not be a problem.
Yeah.
So it'll be survival of a small bands of people if it goes to 4 degrees C.
I just wanted to respond to your friend as well. I know he's not there, or she's not there, who said, more people is better than fewer people. So
could be.
If you take New Zealand and Japan, which are both sort of similar sized islands in the Pacific, one's got, I think, 120 million and the other one's got less than 5 million. Does that mean Japan is a better place than New Zealand? Why does more equate to better? I've never really understood that.
Sure. I guess the thing is, it's like that Irish proverb, oh, how'd you get to X? Well, I wouldn't start from here. Well, permaculture always starts from here.
Yeah.
Where are we right now? What's our current situation? So in Japan, their birth rate is falling. They've got a huge amount of wealth. Their opportunity is to invest their wealth in the ecological regeneration of the countries that they use for their material needs, to invest their wealth in the systems that will look after their older people, and to transition to a smaller society.
Yeah.
New Zealand, small population, they've got less impact on the planet, but hey, they're still having a big impact. I mean, how many people fly to New Zealand and back every year?
Yeah.
So they need to use their wealth and their small size to see what they can do.
Yeah.
We all have to start from here.
Yeah. So we're interested in reducing the market share of multinational corporations.
Yeah.
Is that something that's important to you, and why?
Yes, it is. and the reason why is first of all, there's something about the size of things. When things get to, I think it was Theodore Roszak that said, the problem with the world is the bigness of things. And when things get to a certain size, kind of other things happen. It's like, I'm sure most of the people in ExxonMobil are really actually quite nice people.
Yeah.
But the corporation itself is acting in a really bullying manner. It has done for decades. So there's something about accountability, responsibility, creating organizations which are not too big to fail, creating a connection. I mean, one of the things that I love about local food is I can actually go and chat to the people that are growing it, and I can have a look.
Yeah, to know the name of the people who produce your food is fantastic.
Yeah, I think if something's happening in the other side of the world, well, you've got no way of knowing, no real way of knowing. Mm-hmm. You might have indicators and things on the label and so on, but it's very hard to tell. You can't kind of pop into the local sweatshop and just say, let's see how your Bangladeshi workers are treated.
I think this scale thing applies.
The t-shirt, that looks good.
Yeah, I think the scale thing applies even to the co-op group. If you walk if you walk into your local co-op store, the staff don't really understand that they're working for a co-op. Most of them.
Yeah. So there's a scale issue. There's a responsibility and accountability issue. I don't think that all corporations are evil, and there might be a role for some in the future. But on the whole, I think most stuff that we need can be done much more, not necessarily locally, it might be nationally. The big issue is actually about equity and the fact that corporations essentially mean that shareholders can make large profits.
Yeah.
And the workers themselves don't really often get that. And it's, I think Ed Mayo, in his talk to the Permaculture Convergence in September, said something along the lines of the worker goes up in the car, works in the car park, and he kind of sees the boss getting out with his Lamborghini. He says, "Oh," I said, "I like your Lamborghini." He says, "Yeah, it's lovely. And if you work hard next year, I can get another one." And it's basically, there's something, it feels like, well, actually, there's another way of sharing the surplus. And this is the fundamental thing about permaculture is earth care, people care. This third ethic is really key, actually. Everyone gets earth care, everyone gets people care, but the fair shares bit, part of that, setting limits to consumption and population, redistributing surplus. Redistributing surplus is so we can do more earth care and more people care. So it's like the economic motor, or engine that gets more, or flow system, which gets more energy into the earth care and more people care. So it's the redistributing surplus, which is key. And I think that's an aspect of cooperatives which probably could be more interestingly, could be examined further.
Yeah.
I think it's something about how profits are shared. I mean, at the moment, we've got, for example, we've got a water industry, which takes out roughly 1.6 billion a year of profit into shareholder hands, whether they're UK shareholders or Australian pension funds or German state or whatever it might be. Tax havens and Cayman Islands, who knows? If we were to deprivatise the water industry, and say when I turn on my tap, I was getting water from the West Yorkshire Water Cooperative, and that West Yorkshire Water Cooperative was basically still charging for the service, but the workers were getting a fairer share of the work that they were doing, and the surplus was then put back into ecological restoration of West Yorkshire. We could create a beautiful set of cycles where workers were better treated, where our shared kind of surplus from the water, our kind of multi-stakeholder cooperative with every stakeholder, every person that's got a tap being a stakeholder, us then redistributing our surplus income into the restoration of the ecological system, which is generating the water in the first place. All those things become possible when it's not a corporation.
Yeah.
Because
that's
in a corporation, the surplus has to go to the shareholder.
Yeah, legally.
When it's not a corporation, we can create all sorts of imaginative ways to redistribute that wealth.
Yeah.
And if we can redistribute that wealth to earth care and people care, then we're fixing the planet.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I have really sort of clever friends, and they say, well, what's the problem with going into my local Tesco Express? And it's, well, there's a proportion of that money will immediately leave your community.
Yeah.
If you go to a small shop or a co-op or a sole trader, that money will stay in the community. Okay, at some point they'll probably go into a Tesco Express and it will leave the community. But if you frequent corporate branches in your community rather than community businesses, that money is going to leave the community immediately. There's nothing you can do to stop it.
I mean, I don't think maybe we have a slightly different view. I wouldn't say that. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to try and say what your view is. I guess my view is I'm not against enterprise as such.
No, me neither.
Scale of enterprise, which is a form of creativity, and it's great
to
do things. But on the whole, I'd like to see a far, far bigger cooperative sector, a far, far bigger solidarity economy sector.
Yeah.
Really, if that was the kind of dominant form, and those all sorts of other things around the edges, that would be a very interesting shift. And the main thing for me is that probably the big shift for the cooperative sector is to really embrace its responsibility to the environment as well as to workers. Yeah. And if we could do that redistribution of wealth so that we were fixing the planet as well as fixing social injustice, really we could use the economic life to I mean, economy comes from, it's stewardship of our resources.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very important area, and I think it's good work that you're doing in the non-corporate.
So I was waiting to hear where our difference was, but I didn't hear it.
No, maybe there isn't one. I mean, maybe that's why I backed off from saying that. I just remember we had conversations in Wigan, in the pub.
Yeah.
Where I don't know. I think it's essentially we have to start from where we are.
Yeah. No, when people when we slip into the corporate social responsibility world, that's where I sort of back off. I think that's a negative thing. I think that's pulling in the wrong direction. It's polishing the image of multinational corporations to make people on the cusp think,
yeah,
oh yeah, they're all right. I
think it's probably B Corps, which is where we had our discussion.
That's sort of business. Yeah, that's sort of business.
How do you make the transition? How do we go from a world of corporations to a world of primarily cooperatives? What's that shift? What's that process which converts what we've got to what we want?
Yeah, I think it's evolution. I think it's incremental. We just build that sector slowly and as quickly as we can, but it's just going to take a lot of hard work.
That's why I'm interested in the kind of deprivatization, which is different from nationalisation. There's a big nationalisation agenda coming up.
Deprivatization is different from nationalisation.
Yes, it is.
Go on.
Well, it's a different word, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a different word.
Nationalisation, when people say we need to renationalise, it's like the solution's already been decided. Right, which is basically to go from corporate control to state control.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, if we think about the transition differently by using a different word, we use the word deprivatization, it doesn't imply what the solution is. So deprivatization could mean state control. Deprivatization could mean state passing control to local citizen councils, or cooperatives, or regional bodies. Or all it means is we're going to take it out of the private sector and turn it into some form of social sector economy.
I'm 100% behind you. 100%. I think the
NHS. We need to use different language to try and change the way the debate is conducted.
Yeah, I think the NHS it's moving slowly into the private sector, and wouldn't it be great if it could be decanted into social enterprises and cooperatives and things like that, rather than to GlaxoSmithKline?